I can't remember if it's 77 or 78, punk rock came along. And I was living in Athens being a student at UGA, and I shot a picture of Bruce Springsteen show at the Fox. And I was looking at the photos back in my apartment, and my roommate comes in there and is like, oh my God, I have a camera. Can you show me how to use it? So I showed him, and then he says, well, how can we get better pictures of these rock and roll guys? We need a telephoto lens, not just a normal lens. So we looked up in the magazine how much it cost, and it was $300, you know. He was in a fraternity. So he says, I got a great idea. Why don't we go to my fraternity party and shoot pictures of everybody drinking beer with the sorority girls and sell them to everybody. So we did it, and the first party that we shot, we made like $300. So we split that between the two of us. That was $150 each. That was almost enough to buy a telephoto lens. So we're like, okay, do another party, another party, another party, another party. Next thing we know, we hired a bunch of our buddies to help us, and we started a party picture business to shoot sorority and fraternity parties. In school at that point, the money was coming in pretty easily. We switched from Minolta cameras to Nikon cameras. We bought lights to shoot group pictures. We learned how to use umbrellas and light things and all that sort of stuff. The goal was work for Rolling Stone, you know. We wanted to shoot rock bands and be like Linda McCartney. Meanwhile, back to punk rock. Punk rock comes along, and we had these buddies at the record store. There was a record store called Chapter 3 Records here in Athens. And these two guys, Chris Rasmussen, who's still here now, and a guy named John Underwood ran the record store. We go to the Mayflower, eat lunch, go to the record store, see what new records were out every day. And one day we go in there, and my buddy Chris Rasmussen says, here's a 45 of this band called the Sex Pistols, and it's called God Save the Queen. You got to have this. So we took the thing home and played it, and it kind of blew our minds. It was so different, and because we'd just been through disco. So when punk rock came along, it was like just the ticket. We just jumped into the whole punk rock thing with all full force. We went to see the Sex Pistols, and they played at the Great Southeast Music Hall in Atlanta, which was a little shopping center that had this club that was about the size of the 40 Watt Club that we have here in Athens now. Exact same sort of stage and everything. And little did we know, there were some other people at that show with us from Athens, a guy named Peter Buck and a guy named Ricky Wilson and his buddy Keith Strickland and his sister Cindy Wilson were all there. None of us knew each other, but we shot photos of the Sex Pistols, and it was the first American date that they played. They had a little short tour booked in the U.S., and the first date was supposed to be New York City, but they had a snag getting through immigrations because of some drug charge or something they had. So they had to cancel the New York show. The second date was Atlanta. So our date was the first show that they did. Well, at the end of the show, this writer guy with a British accent comes up to me and says, hey, I'm with Record Mirror magazine from Britain, and I'm writing a story on this, and I need some photos. Could you send me some photos? So he gives me his card. I go home, I print up some photos, black and white shots, and 8 or 10 shots, and stick them in an envelope and ship them off to Britain, which I'm like, this is crazy. This guy will never get these things. It seemed like I was just sending it off to outer space or something. Never heard anything back. 3 or 4 months later, I get a check in the mail for 300 pounds, which in those days was about $600. Pretty good chunk for 1978, you know. And I was like, oh my God, he must have used them, you know. I never saw the article, never saw the magazine, anything, but that was my first published photo ever. Well, meanwhile, in Athens, I met this guy, strange looking guy with curly hair, in a club one night, and started talking to him, and then I'd see him around. You see him around all over town because he was a student, but his name was Micheal Stipe. One night I'm coming home from being out on the town somewhere, and I passed the Last Resort, which at that point was a club, not a restaurant. And I hear somebody, a band in there playing. I go in, it's a cover band that's playing Doors and The Animals and Dave Clark 5, stuff like that, 60s, early 60s stuff, which was unusual because at that point in time, most of the bands that you would hear in the clubs in Athens were playing Southern rock type stuff. I went in there, and this guy that was singing in this band turned out it's Micheal Stipe. I got there at the tail end of the thing, and the show got over. I went over and was like, wow, you know, I finally got to hear you sing. That was really, really great. And he was like, oh my God, this is the most embarrassing thing I've ever done in my life, you know, in this tone of voice that he has. He goes, do you know anybody that plays guitar? I want to get out of this band, you know. And I go, well, I have a guitar, you know, but I wouldn't say that I know how to play it that good enough to be in a band or anything, but there's a lot of people around town. You just got to ask around, you know. He made it very apparent that he was looking for something to do, but he was miserable where he was at. About a month later, I bump into him again. He's like, I found some people, and we've been practicing, and we're going to play somewhere soon, you know. Like, these two guys from Macon, and you know, well, I had bumped into Mike Mills and Bill Berry at parties and knew them, but I didn't know they were musicians. Peter worked at the record store. He worked at Wuxtry, and so I knew him from there. The next time I remember seeing them, I went to Tyrone's, and this must have been the second or third show. So R.E.M. played at Tyrone's, and I saw him, and I saw Micheal Stipe and all of them, and I had to say it was so exciting and so different sounding. Just it had so much energy, and there was such a charm to it that you kind of knew something was happening. Like, wow, these guys, you know, you couldn't understand a damn thing they were saying, but the guitars were great, the energy was great. Micheal Stipe was flailing around like a wild maniac, you know. It reminded me of what it probably felt like to see the Beatles in Hamburg in the Cavern Club or in Liverpool in the early days. That's what it felt like. It was just that kind of vibe, hot, sweaty, people throwing beer and going crazy, you know. During that time period, my sister was the editor of the UGA yearbook, and I had told her that, why don't you let me be the photographer? You'll get better pictures. So she said, fine. So I spent a lot of time roaming around campus with my camera, and Micheal comes walking up, and I'm like, hey, I need some student photos. Can I shoot a picture of you? So he goes up and down the stairs a couple of times with his books and let me shoot a couple of pictures. I was shooting a building picture when he came walking up, so I just had my Hasselblad camera, turned around and shot him. And then a week or two later, the art department, and he comes walking by, and I shot I got him to stand there and look at some artwork like he was a visitor to the museum or something. The whole point wasn't that he was Micheal Stipe. The point was this is student life. Shortly after that, though, they were having a little end of the quarter art show at the art department. So the word got out that R.E.M. was playing. So my sister and I went, and I just brought my camera with me, and it was all this artwork hanging on the wall, and people's moms and dads were there, and they had little plates with chips and carrots, and they were walking around looking at all the artwork that the students had done. And R.E.M. was supposed to be the musical entertainment. So they had set up a little PA and their guitars and amps and everything, and they started playing. Well, it was very loud, and it was one of those situations where the entire crowd just backs way off from the band because either it was loud or it was like embarrassing or something. Nobody stood up close to them, and they were like, "Oh my God, why are we doing this?" So I think to entertain themselves, they started jumping around and acting like wild maniacs just cutting up to be funny. So almost every shot that I took of them, somebody was jumping in the air. They were doing all these poses like The Who or something. And a day or two later, I printed one of the frames and went to the record store with it and bumped into Micheal Stipe and showed it to him. He's like, "Oh my God, I love this." So he goes, we need some photos to send out in our press kit because we're trying to get some dates out of town. We're going to go out to North Carolina and play, and we need to send a press kit. So he's like, "Can you print 20 8x10s? Because we've recorded a couple of songs. We're going to send a tape, and we need to send a photo to these clubs so they'll know what we sound like." So I printed up 20 copies of the thing, brought it down there. Jefferson had moved to town at this point and was starting to be their manager. And so we sat in a room over at Barber Street and stuffed pictures and cassettes into a little bio into envelopes and sent them around to these clubs trying to get them a date. That's the first time that photo, which wound up being used over and over and over, that's where that came from. A year or two later, they used it as a fan club poster or something that they sent out with the fan club. But then when years and years later they got inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, they put out a box set called And I Feel Fine, which was a compilation of their early IRS recordings. And they used that photo as the cover of that album box set. And it was the first time that a photo of the band had been used on one of the covers. So it was a big honor for me. And when the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame thing was on TV and it was on the news, that was the picture that got used, and just over and over and over. So it sort of turned into an iconic, photo of them, which I'm very proud to be a part of.